welcome to Christian Answers. My name is Jeff Short today, and we are good today. My name is Jeff Short today, but tomorrow, I don't know, I may change my name. No, just kidding. Today it is Christian Answer today, and we're going to be tackling a subject that a lot of Christians face every Sunday when they go to church, and that is worship. And I just recently attended a church where it's a large church, big mega church, and the worship time consisted of a band on the front platform area, and then they had two big, huge television monitors, Jumbotron as they used to be called, and the people in the congregation, the thousands of people worshiping, could either look to the stage and look to the front and see the worship leader with a microphone in his hand, or they could look at the large screen televisions, one either here or one either there. So they were on both sides of the stage front area. So you have three different options if you want to follow along with the worship leader. You can follow on Jumbotron to the left or Jumbotron to the right, or you can actually try to watch the worship leader directly live without any electronics, but you're going to see a smaller image of that figure, because if you sit further back, it's hard to see actually the person. So most of the time you're probably going to be following along and clapping, depending on the type of song that's being led. You're going to be following along one of the large big screen Jumbotron televisions. Now, here is the problem that I encounter every time I go to a large megachurch that is formatted this way. When the songs are being sung and people are invited to stand or to participate in the worship service, there are cameras all over the auditorium, and there are probably 4 or 5 different cameras, and someone in the back room is producing the feed for the two Jumbotrons. So they have one camera go up for a close-up, and then another camera for a profile, and the other camera, maybe they have handheld cameras also, wireless handheld cameras. So some wireless camera operator can be walking around on the stage and, for example, zoom in on the drums, and they can show the guy beating the drums at a certain point in the worship music. Or they can zero in on a lead guitar player as he's playing, and they can zoom in on with the portable camera to see him do that, to do the lead part. But most of the time, the cameras in the auditorium are focused on the worship leader, and he is front and center in the large Jumbotron screens up in the front. So most of the thousands of people in the auditorium are watching this worship leader lead them in singing songs of praise. That is my problem. I have a problem with that. And the problem I have with that is, one, objective and also subjective, because I am asked to participate in this worship service. I have gone to the church to participate in worship, and yet I find myself, and along with everyone else, staring at the worship leader during the praise time. And that is the problem. That is the problem. And I wanted to talk about that today, and I wanted to bring this problem to light, because it doesn't seem to be the case that these large megachurch worship leaders and the pastor, the senior pastor of these church, and the elder board and the staff leaders want to talk about any of this. At this particular church, for example, I was at a pastor's conference perhaps maybe 10 years ago, and I raised the question during a question and answer time when all of the pastors are gathered together and we're sort of learning about how this church operates. I raised the question, Well, doesn't that distract when the camera zooms in on either the guitar player playing a lead solo, or the drummer banging on the drums, or the worship leader, a close-up of him singing? Doesn't that distract from the worship of God? And they didn't want to talk about that. That's just a stylistic decision that's made. That's just a decision by the producer who is feeding the large worship screens up there. That's not a theological issue. Well, it is a theological issue. It is a theological issue because what is the whole point and purpose of worship? When you go to a house of prayer, when you go to a church, and you come in there and you're expecting, okay, there will be prayer, there will be a teaching from the Bible, God's Word. You want to hear what God has to say. We want to hear what God's Word is for us, not a word from man, but a word from God. If all we're doing is going there to hear some helpful tips and techniques on how to have a better life and so on and so forth, then why go to church? You don't need a church to give you that. You can go to a lecture at a university and have helpful life tips given to you. You can attend a TED's talk. They have a lot of helpful tips on how to get along in life better. No, you go to church as part of the experience to hear a word from God. And also, when you go to church, you expect that you will be worshiping God, which is you will be focusing on God and then giving God appreciation for who he is and his worthship. That's where the word worship originally comes from in the English, worthship. You're giving and expressing heartfelt praise, and you're expressing how worthy God is and who he is in his goodness and all his attributes and so on and so forth. So it's about God. It's focusing our thoughts and heart on God. Now that's the definition of worship, essentially, when you boil it all down. The problem I have in a lot of experiences I've had in large megachurches is that with the high-tech technology and the cameras and the big screens, it becomes something less than true worship because of the format of the church with these large screens and camera technology and so forth. Like right now, you are seeing an image, you're seeing a picture of me. And I am pretty much framed in the picture. I'm off to the side a little bit, which is, in video, they say you're not supposed to go like right in the middle. You're supposed to be off to the side and give people a little bit of a space on one side or the other so that you are not like filling the whole screen with your talking head in that sense. In a worship service at a church, you're not supposed to be staring at and focused at the worship leader singing. And that is the danger, and that is the problem that I'm trying to address today. When I attended this large megachurch, the way the cameras were chosen, the way the big screens were laid out, the way the producer chose to frame the picture and to set this whole situation up on television, he focused on the worship leader. And so we get to see the worship leader with his microphone, and he's singing and he's leading us in song, supposedly. But in order to lead us in song, we have to be staring at this worship leader the entire time. And for me to have to stare at some dude up there with a microphone as he's singing, that's not my understanding of worship. When I'm worshiping, I'm thinking of God. I'm fixing my mind on God. And so what I have to do is essentially shut my eyes and block out all this visual distraction that's taking place. Or whether it's the guitar player playing a lead part. I mean, if I'm singing a worship song and I'm in church on Sunday morning, I'm not there to see a lead guitar player, shredding a lead guitar part. And as interested as I am about that, and I am because I'm a guitar player myself, that's one of my hobbies. I play acoustic guitar. I have played lead electric guitar or rhythm electric guitar. I know good guitars. I know what it is to appreciate a lead guitar player who can really play well. And so I'm interested in seeing and hearing the lead guitar player play his lead part of a worship song. That's interesting to me. But again, I'm not there to be entertained. I'm not there for a good musical rendition of a song. I am there to worship God. And so watching and getting into that guitar player's instrumentation is actually a distraction for why I'm there in church in the first place. And it's the same way with the lead singer and his vocal ability. I may begin to appreciate and really get into the way he has a good voice and he can hit high notes and he can modulate his voice and he has vibrato and he's doing a great job. But again, that's not why I'm there in church. I'm not there to appreciate a good vocalist. I'm not there to see how good a musician the guitar player is, or how good of a drummer the drummer is, or how great a keyboard player the keyboardist is, or to appreciate the music abilities of the lead singer in the worship band. No, I'm there to focus on God. And that's the problem that I see in quite a number of the megachurches when they incorporate the video technology of these big Jumbotron television, big screen monitors, and camera angles, and have essentially the worship service programmed by a producer in a back room, just like you would a television show. People fixate on those big screens, they watch the worship leader, and that is a distraction to the pure worship of God. They don't think of it as a distraction, but it actually is. And so as Christians, we have to step back and say, yes, we have this technology. We have cameras. We have video editing equipment. We have big screen televisions. We have stage lighting. Another thing that you'll see also in the large megachurches is during the praise and worship time, the time where traditionally it's set apart for the focus on God and the worship of God and the fixing of our hearts and minds on God, you will see in the background of the front, all of a sudden you'll see this little smoke and you'll see some fog drifting by, and it kind of looks strange. It's kind of like in London, the city of London, and at night there's this fog coming in. And lo and behold, the church has a fog machine, and they are now utilizing fog technology. So that kind of looks cool. So somebody goes, hey, let's bring in the fog machine for this worship service. And so when people are worshiping God and trying to focus their heart and mind on God, all of a sudden they'll see this fog drifting through the front, and they'll say, wow, that's cool. And they'll give us a thumbs up or whatever. I don't know what the thinking is there, but fog machine? Really? At a worship service? Okay, well then that's just stagecraft. That's just stage presentation. These are little tricks in the trade. And so a stage producer will throw in these things. But at church, really? I don't know. Shouldn't we talk about that? Shouldn't that be something that we question? Or is that just something, oh, don't worry about that. That has nothing to do with people who come to church. That's just a little cosmetic thing, and it really doesn't affect the theology and the spirituality of the church. Well, I disagree. Everything that distracts a person from the pure worship of God should be discussed. Everything. And that's one of the things that a worship leader has to keep in mind. And that's the way it should be thought through as far as the volume level. If you have a worship group, a music group, or an orchestra, or a band, or whatever you call them, during the Sunday worship time, and they are so loud that it's actually distracting people from the worship of God because it hurts their ears, or they're worrying about whether that might damage their ears. If they're having to think in terms of, wow, this is too loud, that's a distraction. That's a distraction. And so that takes away from their fixing their heart and their mind on God and God alone. And this is something that has to be thought through. It's the same way with the use of technology. Another feature of this large megachurch is that during special events, they began to use one of these boom arms, huge crane it's called. We have the camera out on the end of this large structure, metallic structure, this huge boom crane, where you can actually be way up in the air and you can have the camera shoot down, and you have a camera operator that's running this crane, it's called, and it can get some really super good television shots. And in the case of this megachurch, it's going out to a number of other satellite locations, as they're called. So what you have is the main worship service is at the mother church, where the main church that has thousands and thousands of people. Then it has branch churches where they basically get the live feed from the main church. And so there's actually a lot of video and communication equipment involved in order to get that live feed over to these other churches so people can participate. And so what happens is that you have a situation where you have this crane operator, this camera crane, dolly, boom arm operator, and he's doing, it's like a studio awards show where you have this big contraption taking place in the midst of the congregation. Well, how would you feel if you were sitting close or behind that camera operator who is moving this thing constantly during the worship time? I think you'd be pretty distracted, wouldn't you? You certainly would. You'd be very, very distracted. In fact, it might almost be impossible to actually fix your mind and your heart on God, because every time you open your eyes, you see this thing moving in front of you, and this camera is going up and down and moving. It's kind of like now at the football games, you will see these cameras on a wire, and they're running back and forth from one end zone to the other on this cable, and it allows the camera to get some really great camera shots for the television viewing audience. But if you were actually at the stadium and you happen to be in a place where that thing was at eye level to you, it would be extremely distracting to have this thing going back and forth in front of your eyes all game long. Well, think about it in a worship service. You come to church. One of the key and main elements of the very reason you're coming to church is to worship God, to fix your eyes and minds and hearts on God, and block out everything else and worship God and tell Him that you appreciate Him, that you love Him, you thank Him for His blessings, and so on and so forth. And you do that through the medium of music. Typically in a church, it's done through hymns or praise songs and worship songs or some kind of melody. And all the while you're doing that, you are being bombarded with motion in front of you with this boom arm crane camera mount. And it gets great pictures, and it gives the satellite churches a great video feed of the main service and it shows the band and the worship leader and the backdrop and everything, and it's great for the people who are off campus. But if you're actually behind this crane operator, it's really distracting. It's really distracting. And you have to actually try to make a conscious effort to block it out. And so I know when I am at this large megachurch and they do things like that, there's also some other things. They have a backdrop, and there are all kinds of different things that they do creatively with the backdrop. Sometimes there is a whole set, like a theater set back there, and that sort of sets a mood for, I guess, the message, whatever the topic of the message is. The backdrop has some kind of a related theme on it. Sometimes they actually have like platforms, and they have musicians who are actually standing up on these platforms, and kind of like even Hollywood squares, where they have different levels of platform and different musicians playing at different levels. And again, if from a visual television video production standpoint, it's pretty cool to see the lighting. Sometimes they incorporate, like I said, the fog comes rolling in. You have this boom crane operator operating a camera that gets super cool angles on the camera, and so on and so forth. And a lot of things are happening, and it's all captured on video, and it's all shown on the big screens. But in the midst of all this, the whole point and purpose of people coming is to worship God. And the question is, are we distracting worshipers from worshiping God because we're putting on this big musical event? And I have to say, yes, it takes away from the pure worship of God. Now, a lot of megachurches say, well, you have to realize that we're actually trying to get people who are not worshipers of God, who are not Christians, to actually come in and stay long enough to actually hear the gospel message, receive Jesus, and then enter into real worship. And so in order to do that, we have to use music as sort of a way to attract them. And if they can come in and see and experience a lot of joyful music and praise and worship music, and they, in their carnal state, in their worldly state, they will be attracted to those big screens and what's going on up front on the stage. They will be impressed by a lot of these things, like the fog rolling in and the stage lighting. I didn't mention also this church employs sort of strobe lighting, and they also have like laser lighting. So at certain times there'll be like this green light that kind of like goes through the congregation, the people sitting in the pews, and there'll be sort of spotlights that go all different which ways. They're automatic spotlights. They're on motors, and there's not like one spotlight operator like they used to be on stage productions, but now there are multiple spotlights going in multiple directions, and different color gels can be put in automatically. You can pre-program the lighting to do a certain thing, and then you just push the button and it'll go through the whole sequence of stage lighting, programmed lighting. Again, this is all done in Hollywood stage productions. It's done for television. It's done in the movies. It's done all kinds of places. Concerts, rock concerts, music concerts utilize all of this technology when people come to see a rock concert or a popular music concert. And all of this technology is just standard for large-scale concert venues. But for a church to do this and really get into it, it is a distraction from the pure worship of God. Because worship, when it's done right, is a very simple thing. It's getting people focused on God. It's getting people to the point where they're blocking out all those other thoughts They're coming to church on Sunday morning with financial thoughts. They're coming to church with marital problem thoughts, family problem thoughts. Their children are rebelling. There's problems at work. There are physical problems, injuries. There are psychological problems people come into the church with, and all the problems of life. And worship is supposed to be a time where, even though we're going through all kinds of problems and trials and tribulations in life, you can focus on God, and you could say, nevertheless, God, you are good, and your mercies endures forever. And you just read through the book of Psalms. Those are the pure worship thoughts and sentiments of King David. And you get your mind off you and your thoughts and your problems, and you put your mind on God, and God encourages you, He helps you, He strengthens you, and you at the same time as a creature are giving your value and your worth and your expressions of praise and worship to God, your Creator. And that's worship in a nutshell. And music traditionally has helped facilitate that process of worship, because just like poetry facilitates that process of worship. So you have the book of Psalms, and it's filled with sort of poetics, expressions of praise. And then when you add melody to that, the way the hymns do, the way the praise and worship songs do, then it sort of like greases our own desire to worship God and puts wings on our expressions, and it really helps the worship and praise and thanksgiving to God flow because of the melody and the worship and the music. But when you get too fancy and you bring all the technology in, the video screens, the cameras, the stage smoke machine, and the stage laser lighting and all of that, then you're getting people off of God and you're putting the focus on the production itself, and that can be harmful. So my message today has basically and essentially been, we need to be very careful in our churches. We need to make sure that with all of the high-tech gadgetry that we use, with all of the high-tech, innovative, creative worship techniques that we employ, that we aren't actually hurting the pure worship of God, and rather than helping it, because we don't want to go too far and get too fancy and therefore negate the whole process, the whole purpose of what we're trying to do in the praise and worship time at church. So that's just been an expression that I've had in my heart. I hope that's been helpful, and we'll see you back next week on another edition of Christian Answers. God bless.